top story, of course, is the fact that UPI services will now be made available to Sri Lanka and Mauritius. In fact, today, Prime Minister Modi will be virtually joined by his counterparts in Sri Lanka and the Mauritian president to launch the unified payment interface. Kartik Malhotra joining me here. Kartik, this is a virtual, gathering where all the three head of states will be meeting to launch UPI services. What does it really mean for these two countries?
I think it means tremendously a lot for India, Shweta, and also for those who are looking at visiting Mauritius or Sri Lanka both. And remember, this comes exactly 10 days after 2nd of February when France opened UPI acceptance, especially for Indians visiting the Eiffel Tower. So that was one of the gateways, one of the centers of payment where Indians traveling to France could scan and buy their tickets to Eiffel Tower using the Indian UPI. A similar service is now getting unrolled starting today at 1 p.m. today, like you said. Prime Minister Modi, along with the Sri Lankan President Ranil Wickremesinghe, as well as the Mauritian Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth, are going to virtually open this service to Indians who are looking at visiting these two countries. Now, what it means is if you and I as Indians decide to travel to Sri Lanka or Mauritius, then our bank accounts linked to our existing QR codes or our existing UPI apps can scan any QR code in these countries and payments will be remitted from our domestic bank accounts to those bank accounts. It's pretty much like using a debit card internationally, right? So this is one linkage. The other linkage in Mauritius also comes by way of the RuPay card.
Absolutely.
So banks in Mauritius are going to link the RuPay card and offer RuPay cards in addition to existing Visa and MasterCard protocols. RuPay cards will now be issued to customers of banking services in Mauritius. So that is another India-stacked DPI, NPCI denominated venture called RuPay, which is also getting its global foray.
Absolutely. And in midst of all of this, I think the India stack story also stands out. The fact that UPI as a service, which is ingrained in our minds and our daily habits, will now be made accessible to us Indians outside. What does it actually tell you about India's prowess when it comes to DPI and when it comes to UPI for that matter? India's digital public infrastructure and India's digital public goods are now being made accessible, they are being talked about, and they're being increasingly praised in our neighboring countries.
So, as I see it, Shweta, these are still very early days. So, to my mind, it doesn't take too much. I mean, it takes a great deal bilaterally, diplomatically, to get QR code stickers printed and pasted in international locations, right? But at the end of the day, if you have an active internet connection and your app is not geo-blocked, your Google Pay or even Paytm right now for that matter, PhonePe, any of these apps, as long as they are not geo-locked, you unlock them for, let's say, Sri Lanka and Mauritius, you go there. At the end of the day, it is the same technology, a QR code being scanned, money being debited right from the bank account which is linked. So as of now, I think this internationalization of UPI is still largely limited to just acceptance of QR codes, acceptance by Indian tourists who have an Indian bank account and Indian UPI account. I think we still have a long way to cover when we talk about the DPI export potential. What you really want DPI, the digital public goods infrastructure, to reach the world eventually should be the entire revolutionization of the banking system internationally using the architecture of DPI. That is not yet happening. So whether you talk about UAE or Bhutan or Sri Lanka or Mauritius, which are getting added now, or France, largely the story still is centered around Indians who have an Indian bank account which is linked to an application that works in India, not geo-locked in that location, scanning and pretty much doing what they do in India, doing outside of India. What you really need the DPI to deliver for the world is what Google Pay or what Apple Pay has delivered, which is by way of this entire stack of technology, the entire architecture being adopted and India getting the dollar revenue for adoption of that stack. Absolutely. Indian IT companies going and installing it, NPCI going and installing it at a bank level, at a nation level, so that residents of those countries can also experience the Indian technological prowess of UPI, and the service may not be restricted to those visiting India or Indians visiting assisting those countries
Right,
along.
so export of DPI as a service to other countries, perhaps that is going to be the next step when it comes
That
to
should be. I think
India's
that is what the
digital public
government is. That is
infrastructure.
what the government is pushing. Even if you look at the economy review released by the government, we are looking at this DPI export to become one of the additional export items from India. So right now our export story has been more or less limited to IT and IT alone, right? This is IT enabled, but this is pretty much a redefinition of how banking is done. It's a redefinition of how KYC is done. It's a redefinition of how bank accounts can be opened just using the Aadhaar stack, for example, in India, but a similar interface somewhere else. So basically this entire architecture, this entire stack has to be exported. And you've got to take this service to other countries so that their domestic banks, their domestic residents can use this stack and experience the ease of payments like Indians face here.
Absolutely, but good news, at least for today, Indian Prime Minister will be launching the UPI service with their Mauritian and Sri Lankan counterparts at about 1 p.m. where UPI will be made available in these two countries.